kind of fast forward and you kind of see the writing on the wall with your marriage.
Right.
All right. You know, you don't have to get into all the detail, but maybe just share a little bit about how that maybe came about to some extent, and then what was going on with Wendy in
Yeah.
that time. What was going on with you spiritually, emotionally, and even physically. And yeah, so I'll throw
Yeah.
that to your direction.
Yeah. Uh, so it was about 2 years later, 2 years after our daughter was born, that we ended up separating. My husband had been struggling for some time with the idea of being polyamorous. So that would mean that, like, wanting to add additional people to the marriage. It's the best way I can describe that. And I think most people these days have probably heard of it, actually. but
I'm
but
glad you explained it because I was going to ask that anyway.
it
So,
is it's a little complex. Um, but he had been for some time trying to convince me to basically extend our marriage to include others, right? Um, this had been going on for a while. But at this particular point was when he developed an emotional attachment to a woman that he had met through the internet. And she was willing to kind of indulge his desires or whatever. And he decided that he wasn't willing to fight it anymore. And so divorce followed. Um,
now,
so,
let me back up just a little bit.
sure.
So, but he would have had an understanding of who Jesus is, and he
He,
would have been involved
right.
to some extent in the local church,
Yes.
correct? Okay.
Yes. Yes. Uh, he, yes, he had, I would say, more than ample opportunity to understand, um, what Scripture had to say about that, and what his vow to me in our marriage ceremony would have meant, that he took before God. Um, so, um, yeah, he
Okay.
knew that was not anything that I wanted to consider, or that God would have approved of. So,
Okay. So now you're walking through that. He steps away. You guys separate.
right.
Okay. What's
So,
going on with Wendy?
yeah, so, it was definitely really hard to make the decision, really. So that was the part that I had the most anxiety about, was, because really what he did not want the marriage to end. He wanted for us to continue our relationship with, adding more. but
Which
but
isn't, just to be clear, that is not marriage.
right.
That
Right.
is polygamy. That is, I mean, and it's
Right.
not to sugarcoat it, and it's not that people don't struggle with that and fall into affairs and et cetera, et cetera. And not that there's not forgiveness for that either, available for that. But that doesn't mean you, as the wife of a husband that wants to walk in that way, has to submit yourself to that.
Right. Absolutely. And I think, for me, I had kept this a secret, and I feel like to me that's like kind of number one red flag,
Mm,
that I had not, um I had not been at liberty to even share with someone else how I was struggling with, what he was going through. Do you
mhm,
see what I'm saying?
mhm.
So
Yep.
so it wasn't just that I couldn't share his struggles, but I could not share my own struggles in the midst of that, which was very unfair to me.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, was that
so
something that he placed on you, or you felt like he placed on you, or is that something that you kind of carried and you felt
yeah,
like, if I say this to somebody, I'm betraying him, or, you know,
I, you know, I think it was just understood.
okay.
He never said to me, you can't say this to
Hmm.
anybody. He never said that to me. Um, but there was definitely an understanding. There were times I remember, there even specifically, there was a sermon that you preached where we were both there in attendance, and I cannot remember the exact topic of the
Well,
sermon,
I won't remember it, so that's
but it was extremely applicable to this specific struggle that he was having.
hmm.
And and I remember at the end of the service kind of meeting eyes with him and prompting him, and as soon as he realized what I was leading him towards, you could just see the shutdown of,
Mm,
we're not going there.
hmm.
um and so I'd say it was things like that were
Okay.
kind of unspoken,
Yeah.
but you know um uh but
Well, and
it was really
I
expected
know
that I.
this too. You're very loyal and you're very faithful from the standpoint of you're very protective of people, even though you're quite vulnerable yourself. You're very protective of other people. So you don't, and you're not a gossip. You're not somebody that's just going to go and talk about somebody else's struggles or whatever. So there's all that goes into that mix too, that I think is God honoring. And yet at the same time, when something like this happens, you know, you need you need somebody there that can then help give perspective and help to encourage you and him to walk this out in a way that's honoring to God, and that is really redemptive, that
Right.
really helps to bring about this, um, taking what is meant for evil and helping it to be something that really is made into something beautiful. So
Right.
so I interrupted, but go ahead a little bit and let's hear what a little bit more of what you were
Yeah.
thinking and stuff.
Well, and I think that for me, once the decision had been made, because really, I mean, it's hard to even say whose decision it was to separate the marriage. It was like his actions, right, were
Hmm.
kind of leading it to down this path. But if he wanted the relationship to stay intact, it's hard to say that he was the one who ended it or I was
Right.
the one who ended it. But ultimately, I guess that I feel like the decision was kind of in my hands. I either stayed and consented to this plan, or I left.
Hmm.
um and so I feel like making that decision, and thinking through beforehand in my thought process. Okay, he had been a part of my life since I was in high school. So much of my identity, was with him. So taking all of what that means, and thinking through, all of, there was plenty of good, right?
Hmm.
There in that relationship, there were so many things that it was like, um I don't know. Nobody likes the same quirky television shows that I like. And like, but you think through all of the things. I mean, I know that
Yeah,
that's a silly one.
but I understand. Yeah, I
But you
understand what you're saying.
you're bonded to a person, um, and it's so much more than you know than the basics of okay, we're separating our stuff, or we're separating, but it takes time to separate your spirits. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
and so I
Because
understood that.
you really do become one. It's not just a
Right,
physical thing. It's not just in locality that you're, oh, we live in the same house or we sleep in the same bed. It's so much more than that.
right,
It really is. You become knit together, and you're tearing that apart.
right. Yeah, yeah. So, um, so the majority of the anxiety came with just me thinking through all of that beforehand, and thinking through, nobody even knows about, what has been going on.
Hmm.
And I'm going to have to explain this to people. And all of a sudden, I'm going to be a divorcee. And is my church going to judge me for that?
Hmm.
What are my parents even going to say?
Right.
Um, and so, just walking through all of those
Wow.
things in my mind beforehand.
Yeah.
Um, and then weighing it all and making a decision that, like, I was not willing. I knew that I was not there are lots of people who say that I should have gotten out of the marriage long before I did.
Hmm.
I do disagree with that. Even though nobody knew and I
Hmm.
wasn't taking advice from anybody because they weren't made aware of the situation. Um, uh, I knew what my threshold was.
Hmm.
I had decided, like, I can handle this up until we get to this point. And when we got to that threshold, that was when I said I won't compromise any further on this.
Hmm.
Um, and that was, when I started walking through. Okay, now this is how we deal with making a separation. But once the decision had been made, I honestly felt much better almost immediately.
Hmm.
Um, and uh,
So what changed? Like when you say you felt better, what does that mean?
while I knew that I still had a lot of work to do to, to, um, all of the things that come with divorce,
Right.
um, I still had that to do, but because I knew that I was walking in the right direction, having made this decision, that I believed that God was okay with this decision, and that I was okay with this decision, that it just felt like I wasn't carrying the weight of the problems that had been in our marriage for so long.
Yeah. So
That was
how,
gone.
yeah, how did you get to the point where you you could look at this, you know, impending divorce and say, you know what? I think God's okay with this.
Yeah. Um,
And I know, I mean, you weren't prepped for this question, so this is like not like
yeah,
you were prepped for all these questions even, but
right. Um, so I think, you know, even though he had not physically, um, been with another woman, he was planning to. And if she had been in town, he would have, right? But
yeah.
they knew each other, via the internet. And within a matter of a month or two, I believe, that is what happened after our separation. So that would have even been prior to our divorce. Um,
Yeah.
but to me, what what was going on was adultery.
Yeah.
And it was a clear road, um, straight down that path that he had no intention of changing.
And the thing is, it wasn't that he didn't have opportunities all along the way to change his mind, to, repent, if you want to use that word, but to change his mind and to change his direction, because even like you mentioned, that one message that seemed to clearly apply. It's funny how
Right.
God does that, isn't it? But
Yeah.
he had opportunities to say, man, I need to do something about this. It's gotten out of hand. Um, and
Right.
so so you walk through the divorce,
Yeah.
all right, and maybe you can share a little bit of that, whatever is appropriate, but you get outside the other end of the divorce. The divorce is finalized, all right? Where's Wendy at this point? Emotionally, spiritually, physically, even, relationally with parents and
Mm.
friends and church and things like that.
Yeah. Um,
And
well,
even in the midst of that, how did the church play a role
yeah.
in you walking through this?
Well, I will say that everybody, I can't think of any single person in my life that did not exceed my expectations in their response.
Wow.
Which
May
was
that be that way for everyone that walks through something similar.
absolutely, absolutely.
Man.
I definitely, I mean, I remember talking to my parents. I talked to them over the phone about it. I didn't have an opportunity to sit down with them in person. Things were
Yeah.
kind of happening so fast. But I was shocked at their support. They had been married for, at that point, 40 something years. Definitely, divorce was not something that they supported in any way. I would have been the first person in my family to be divorced. Um, and it was amazing how quickly, they said, please just let us know how we can help. Anything that we can do to help. And they were so supportive that, one of the, when it came time to actually sign the divorce papers and I had the opportunity to change my name again, I said, I am taking my father's name back because it's an honorable name. And specifically because of the way that they walked through that divorce with me, I was like, that I don't want this last name anymore, but I do want this one. It's an honorable name. And but I was shocked. I was very worried about being judged, just even if it wasn't my fault, just for being divorced.
Yeah.
But and then as far as the church goes, my goodness. I mean, after having the discussion with my husband that we were going to separate, we had made the decision. The very first person that I called was a lady from the church who I formed a great relationship with. Her name is Susan, and she's several years older than me, and she had never
just a few.
An older lady. It wasn't a friend, that was my age, that could just, console with me. This was someone who had wisdom.
Yes.
Is the reason I mention
does.
age, right?
Yep.
So she had never walked through divorce. She had never been divorced, but I knew immediately that this was who I wanted to reach out to. She had always been so supportive with, anytime that I would talk about my daughter, and losing her, and her interaction with me was always just so healing. Her care for me was just fantastic. And so I knew that was who I was going to meeting. And of course, it was shocking news. So, she sat and she listened to me and she hugged me and she helped me think about next steps. Um, uh, and that, so I will never forget that. So, and then as far, the rest of the church, I can talk specifically about your role in this. I mean, you provided the stability of a pastor, throughout this entire process. You had those difficult conversations with my husband that needed to be had, while at the same time making sure that I was being cared for. And you were so discreet about the details of everything that it actually makes me laugh a little bit, because while I was not there, when you explained to the congregation of the church what was going on, and the reason you explained it was because I needed assistance. It wasn't just, but I wasn't there, but it must have just been, the most discreet conversation, because there were people who did not know the details of why the marriage broke down. And years later, I had conversations with people and they were like, oh, well, we didn't know that was what was going on. And I love that there was no gossiping,
That's wonderful.
And it was, they treated me with respect. But they also treated my husband with respect. You treated my husband with respect. And even in the midst of separating from him, I was just thankful for that, because there was no, I didn't have to contend with, people talking badly about him or encouraging me to talk badly about him. And just, it was just, people with open minds and open hearts and willing to just help and not insult or judge and be like Jesus in this moment.
Wow.
Of, this trauma.
Yeah. So we're talking now, that's been 15 years? 13 years, something like that?
It has been 15 years.
Okay. Yeah. How are you doing with that now?
How am I doing with just being
thinking back?
divorced?
Yeah, and thinking back, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
and anything emotional, like is there much emotion attached to that anymore?
That's an interesting question. I don't think so. When I think about it, no. I don't.
Does it almost feel like another life? Like this is like, yeah, this happened to me, but man, that just seems like a different lifetime.
It kind of does, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it really, there's I guess I remember what it's like to be married.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of funny to think about it, but when I think of about people who are going through divorce now that I know of, I mean, I've definitely had friends who've walked through divorce since I divorced.
Right.
And I can think about those things and how it affected me then, and maybe give them, advice about that as they're walking through their own situation. And so I think about it, but I can't even imagine the last time that I cried about being divorced.
Mm-hmm.
That just doesn't.
But there were tears in the midst of it.
Yeah.
Of walking through it, and even after that. But
yeah,
as the years have gone by, that kind of emotion has just gone by the wayside.
Yeah,
like.
Definitely. But I think that maybe the reason why that is because I mean, I was able to make a clean break from this marriage. We did not have a child that we needed to
Yeah.
figure out how to co-parent. There was no continual hurt. We weren't, we didn't have to deal with each other after that. And that's not everybody's situation.
Right.
But I really was able to just move on. And I think that was the healthy thing to do. I mean, definitely wallowing in it would have been a big mistake.
What advice, having friends that are walking through it right now, but I'm thinking of somebody that doesn't know Wendy, but you've walked through this, you're farther down the road and past, but they're walking through a really difficult relationship right now.
Right.
And, whether it's infidelity or it's abusive in some way, or not that infidelity is an abuse in itself, or it's really difficult right now. What kind of advice would you give to someone in that place?
Well, I think if you're still in the relationship, I what I mentioned before as far as like me keeping a secret that wasn't my secret. I think if you're being asked to do that, I would seriously reconsider your situation. Everybody needs to share their load with somebody else. And if you're in the church and you're able to share everything else except this thing because of your relationship, then you know what a weight it is to just carry it yourself. So I would say anybody who's in that situation, if it's an abusive type of relationship and you're being asked to keep somebody else's secret, I really think that you should reconsider that. So that would be one thing that I would say from my own experience, if you're still in the relationship.
Okay.
I think if you have ended a relationship or you're at the end of a relationship, my advice would be let it go as much as possible. Like, don't harbor bitterness. Don't consider all of that time that you spent with them as wasted time. Like, don't dwell on that.
That's really good.
Just move on. One of the things that I did that I think was very beneficial was I asked my friends and family from the get-go, please just don't even mention him. Not in a sarcastic way, but genuinely, I need to, unless I bring him up because I need to,
work through
deal with something, right? Please don't, don't try to talk to me about what he's doing or, oh, you ran into him somewhere or whatever. I don't want to know. I don't need to talk bad about him. We just need to move on. And pretty much everybody honored that request. But even if someone did, want to start something that change the subject, we can move on to something else.
Did that offend you if somebody did that?
It didn't offend me. I mean, I think that, honestly, most of the divorces that I see in the world are, people pecking at each other, going for, and so oftentimes for years. There's just that, bitterness between them, and everybody wants to talk bad about the person. I don't recommend that at all. I think that it's, I think that especially for Christians, that this is something you absolutely can do. You are capable of, of just leaving what they've done, what the wrongs that they have done to you, leave them in the past, and move forward. Um, at the time, the only time that I would really talk about my husband was in prayer, and I did do that for a while, not for long, but it was helpful to my spirit to ask God to continue to help him to find his way. I cared very much for him. I was married to him, for a number of years. I wanted for him to be able to straighten out his life. And even if I was not part of that, it was helpful to me to ask God to be looking out for him.
Yeah.
And I did do that for a couple of years, and I definitely I did not continue that.
Yeah. I think that's just my perspective on this. That's so helpful because that's the practicality of forgiveness. That's the essence of forgiveness, is that yes, were there things done, you had every right, at least from the world's perspective, to say, all kinds of things about him and how he treated you and what he expected, and, his emotional as well as his physical adultery. But that and I think back to those times, I don't remember that. I remember the hurt, and I remember the sense of betrayal and being able to get that out and start to realize that's what this is. And then you being very purposeful about guarding him and his reputation personally. And there was such grace there first of all, there was grace there initially to reconcile, but then, that wasn't what he was after. And reconciliation takes two. It never happens with just one. And that's even in our relationship with God. We're reconciled because of what Jesus did for us. And us finally getting to the point of saying, yeah, it's enough. I can't make it any better. It's
right.
not, I can't improve on what Jesus did. And yeah, I believe that's enough. But I think in the midst of that, you grasped a lot of that and applied it so well, Wendy. There was such a graciousness and kindness towards him, even though there was significant pain on your part. And usually pain and sense of betrayal, wants to force us down the path of bitterness and anger and spite and malice and all those other words and emotions, and justifiably, we justify it in our own mind to do that. And God said, no, you forgive him. And that doesn't mean that you have forgotten what he did, but that means that you're not drinking the poison anymore.
Right.
Because that poison's only going to poison you. It's not going to poison him. He's not anywhere around. So I just commend you in that. And I'm going to take a jump forward, unless you have something else that you wanted to add there.
I would say the only other thing that I would say to somebody who is walking through this is, if you're scared of being alone and you are really trying to find a new relationship as quickly as possible, I do not recommend it unless it is a relationship with Jesus. He's a fantastic rebound relationship. But, I loved my time with God after my divorce. I mean, much more so even than my time, after my daughter died. It was really golden time where my relationship with him grew. He was my, he was the person that I had discussions with, and it grew into this beautiful thing. And I look back even now, in the life that I live every day now, I look back at that time and I can remember it with such fondness, and it makes me, have all these distractions now that
Yeah.
stop me from having that kind of communion with him. But it makes me look forward to my time with him in the future in heaven, especially, where I'm just like, there will be no distractions. And I loved that time where I seemingly, to an outsider, I'm just all alone, but I was not alone. I was, those
So
were actually
good.
really great days.
That is so good. Um, and the picture I have, even when you're saying that, is that there, when that time comes, and he either comes and gets you, comes and gets us, or you die and you go to him, whatever the case is, there's a seat right across the table from him that's yours.
Mm,
And I don't know how he does it,
right,
because to God, we're all his favorites. All right.
right.
But you're going to have front row seat, face to face, be able to hug him, be able to have this time with him. Uh, that's going to be, it's going to eclipse all the questions that we have on this earth. I'm sure I'm still thinking, I got other questions for you, God. I got questions for you. But
Right.
at that point, I think a lot of those are just going to dissipate and it's going to mean nothing. So that's incredible advice, because I think that's one of the biggest fears of somebody that's walking through this is they say, so who's going to take care of me?
Right.
Who's going to protect me? From a woman's side, who am I going to come home to?
Right.
Where do I find? And I think one of the things too, Wendy, is that you were so faithful in being a part of the local church that you had those relationships that when you wanted to share or be with people, there were opportunities to do that. And I think my advice on the heels of that too is to somebody walking through this, and maybe you're not a part of a local church. You know what? Go find one. And if you have a hard time finding one, I have recommendations. Wendy has recommendations of some incredible churches out there of people that will love you and care for you and give you that advice that Susan has, and they'll walk with you through it.
Mm,
And it opens that door just to have that kind of relationship with Jesus that you didn't have before. It's not that it wasn't available. It's not that you didn't taste some of it, but that whole crisis in itself just thrust you. It at like light speed threw you into this relationship with God because everything else is stripped away.